Good day, everyone. The topic for this video is we just don't care or aren't impressed. And what this video is going to consist of is a list that I've made of things that women in many cases believe erroneously that men value or that men care about in terms of making them interesting or making them potential dating prospects. And they're things that in some cases involve projection, thinking that men feel the same way they do about things. But in a lot of cases, it's just a complete sort of lack of acknowledgement of how men actually think and what men are actually doing in terms of trying to date for those men that are still involved in that process. And I'm going to get to those points later in the video, but I'm going to start off with a list of things that I feel like we as men, or at least a lot of men, don't really care about or are not impressed with. The first thing is a woman's income or career. And this is an example of what I just alluded to a little bit about projection, right? Women think that because they want a man that makes a lot of money or has a prestigious career, that men want that with them, that they bring something to the table by having a successful career or making a lot of money. And the truth of the matter is that that does nothing for us. There's nothing that a woman's income or career does aside from pricing herself out of the market, because women tend to be hypergamous, as many who watch my channel probably already know. Women tend to only date up. And so all that really means to us is that you're probably going to be more expensive. You're going to have higher standards. You're going to want more out of a man. And unless a man has a large number of resources, a large amount of savings, a large amount of money basically, you're not really going to be interested in a typical average guy or a guy that's anywhere close to that. And so all that really means to us, all that really indicates, is that you're going to be more expensive. You're going to be more concerned about your job, right? You're going to be more concerned about what you do outside of any potential relationship experience. So why should we work that hard? What advantage is there in dating a woman that makes a lot of money when we're never going to see any of that money? The cash flow does not go from the woman to the man. Her money is her money, and your money is our money, if you're looking at it from the guy's perspective. So any money that she makes is just her money anyway. It's not something that you're going to have access to. She's not going to stay with you in all likelihood if you're broke, or if you're not doing well for yourself, or if you experience, whether it's a health problem or a layoff or just a slowdown in the economy so you're not making that much money. She's not going to bail you out just because she has a good career, right? That's not going to help you in any way. That's just going to make her more expensive to try to entertain, to try to impress. And guys, for the most part, are not interested in doing all that extra work for a woman that probably is not going to be interested in you unless you have a bunch of resources to give away. And men are figuring out, or men realize in a lot of cases, that there's just no benefit in dating a woman that makes a lot of money or has a successful career. That's not something that we really care about. Something that exists alongside that is a woman's degree or her level of education. That doesn't necessarily, of course, correspond with having a successful career, because you can be highly educated and have trouble finding a job because you didn't get educated in the right things, or because for whatever reason you decided to follow your heart, or whatever the case may be, and maybe you're not as successful financially. But we're also not impressed with you having an education. Again, that does nothing for us, really, from the man's perspective. There's no benefit to us. It most likely just means that you think you're higher status, and so you're only going to date a guy that also has that high status. You're only going to date a guy that is also well educated. And studies have shown this, where women that don't have an education have been asked questions about, would you date a guy that didn't go to college versus women that have a degree, and there's a substantial difference, again, due primarily to hypergamy. So again, there's no benefit to us in trying to date a woman that thinks that she's of higher value because of her education. Like I mentioned before, this is basically projection. This is basically just, I have this degree and this is what I find impressive with men, so men should be impressed with this as well. And that's just not the way it works. because there's no benefit to us. A third factor that's on my list here of things that we don't care about, although this is something that fits more into the aren't impressed category, is a woman's body count or relationship history. If she's had a lot of different sexual partners, if she's got kids as a result of her prior sexual partners, and that's worth making a video on its own, right? The single mom issues. That's been covered a lot within the men's community, though. But if you have a long relationship history, if you've had a bunch of different partners, or if you have children that we as men had no say in creating, we didn't have anything to do with that situation, that is not a bonus. That is not something that a man should want to take on because he needs to prove that he's worth being a stepdad, or he's the guy that's going to pay for something that so many other men got for free. And I realize that being a single mom and being promiscuous are not necessarily the same thing, but in this case, they pretty much fall into the same category in the sense that there's no reason for us to deal with any of it. You basically having this history or having kids from a prior relationship or whatever the case may be, that is a negative thing. We are not impressed with your sexual history. We want you to have a limited sexual history. For the men that are still dating and still care about this at the very least, we don't want to date a woman that's been with every guy on the block. We don't want to date a woman that, even if she hasn't been with every guy on the block, has children due to a failed relationship in the past. I would go as far as to say, and again, this is worth its own video, most likely, I wouldn't even date a widow, right? You still had no say in creating those children. This is not something that impresses us. This is not a bonus. We don't think that your sexual history is a mark of success and that we should be interested in that challenge. It does nothing positive for us in any way to sign up for that. And so we are not impressed with your body count or with your relationship history if it's extensive and has led to a lot of damage or a lot of outcomes that, again, like with children, we really had no say in determining. We're not going to put ourselves in that position for being in a relationship or dating because that's just not something that adds anything to our life, unfortunately. It's not something that benefits us in any way, and in most cases, these things are a great detriment to dating or trying to find a relationship partner for the guys that are still interested in doing that. Another thing that we are not particularly interested in, that we don't care about, or that doesn't impress us is a woman's general demands or expectations of men, of a man making a certain amount of money, being in really good physical shape, six-pack abs, six-figure income, 6 feet tall is the classic example that has been used time and time again in this community. We're not interested in those demands because, again, unless you're willing to give something in return for that, there's just no reason to take it seriously. We don't care about what you expect from men because those expectations just make it harder to deal with you and just make it harder for us to meet any sort of standards that you may have. In other words, the more ridiculous a woman's standards are for men, the more that it's just not worth our time to even really try to impress the woman or to try to prove our worth to her. We're not interested in proving anything along those lines anymore. There's no value in it for us. And I could get into the whole dynamic of just rejecting relationships in terms of commitment and whatnot entirely. But basically, I think it's sufficient to say here that it just doesn't do us any good to try to compete with women that have all these ridiculously high standards because we don't really get anything for that. There's no value. Another point, another factor that women like to be proud about or act like is a positive thing is the whole I'm strong and independent, I don't need a man, I'm proud to be a feminist type of mentality that a woman may have. We're not interested in dealing with that either. That just means you're a lot of work. That just means that you're probably going to look down on us and disrespect us as a guy. We don't have time for that. There are too many things that are more important and actually add positive value to our life for us to want to play around with some woman that thinks that she doesn't need a man and that she's better than nearly all of the men around her. We don't have time for that kind of ideology, that kind of nonsense, the type of bitterness and hatred that typically goes along with that. It doesn't matter how hot you are. If men who are considering dating or relationships look at that, they're just going to use you for a one-night stand if you have a nice body and a nice figure. If they like your parts, they're still not going to date you. This is not a positive thing or any sort of beneficial factor for men to want to deal with. If you have this, I'm strong and independent, I'm a feminist, I don't need a man, I'm going to rub it in your face that I'm this good, I'm better than you at this, I'm better than you at that, we're not going to see that as a challenge. We're just not going to put up with you. We're just not going to date you if you're that type of woman with that type of attitude. And that brings me to the final point on my list here, which is just other selfish and generally unpleasant or obnoxious personality traits, which a lot of women have today in a variety of forms that relate to the other points on my list that I've made, right? Either you've had bad experiences with men because you were promiscuous, or you're a feminist, so you look down on men and disrespect them anyway, or you think you're too good for a man because of your education and your career. All these things tie into the just general, you have a bad attitude, you're not someone that really is pleasant to be around, we can't have an intelligent adult conversation with you without you getting offended because you've not decided that you're going to basically be better than this. We don't have time for that either. If you're someone that is not pleasant to be around, we're not going to date you. Again, if you're attractive, some guys will maybe try to do the pump and dump thing. I'm not really a supporter of that, but I understand why it goes that way, because there's nothing positive here with a woman that is just spiteful or vindictive or difficult to get along with in some form that is basically just not worth putting up with in any sort of dating scenario. And that's the conclusion that I'm trying to draw here. The inspiration for this video, if you want to call it that, is just this complete lack of understanding that men, and I've said this many times in other videos, men do things based on incentive or perceived incentive, not based on what women or society think they should do. For the guys that are very thirsty and they haven't learned to discipline their biology, that basically think with their dicks, in other words, their perceived incentive is way off from what their actual incentive is, but they're still doing things based on what they think is in their interest. But for the men that are more intelligent and more mature and are able to actually look at things based on what really benefits them versus what doesn't benefit them, all of these things on this list are things that simply do not benefit men to deal with. We don't see it as a challenge. We don't see it as some sort of work in progress. We just don't care to deal with women or to deal with people in general, or really things in general, that we can't have a positive experience with or impact on. That's not going to lead to some sort of positive result for us. It is a waste of time to deal with women that just think that they're better than you, or that demand that you adhere to feminist ideas, adhere to feminist ideology. We're not going to put up with that. It's just a waste of our time. We do things based on what is actually beneficial to us. And for the guys that still date or still want to have some form of relationship with a woman, intelligent guys that are worthwhile, that women actually want to have relationships with, right? That would be a stable partner and do things in a reasonable manner and be intelligent with how they plan their lives. These guys are not going to put up with this crap. They're not impressed with your body count. They're not intimidated by your career and your income or your level of education. They just don't care, and they're not impressed with any of this. That is something that women really have a hard time understanding. And even the message that's put out in society, which of course is more or less from women's point of view, is, I don't know why men are this way. They're just intimidated. They're just scared by these women. They just think that they're too good for a woman with a high body count and they're missing out. No, they're not putting up with this crap. They realize there's nothing beneficial about this unless you as a woman offer something positive that's substantial. And I would argue that a lot of the traditional stuff, like taking care of the home and whatnot, is probably not sufficient for that anyway. I don't know what is sufficient. I personally reject the idea of a long-term or committed relationship anyway. But if you are going to have some form of relationship with a guy, that guy has to find something that's actually beneficial to his life through that relationship. It can't just be sex. It can't just be, oh, I'm going to be the traditional conservative woman now. It has to be based on, here's what I offer you. I actually have your back as a friend, right? I'm actually loyal to you. I'm not going to cheat on you. I'm not going to be promiscuous and show my goods off to every other guy in town, even if you're not necessarily cheating. I'm not going to give you a hard time over BS. I'm actually going to support you with the things that you do in your life if you're willing to do the same for me. That kind of thing is what a lot of guys are looking for, and probably, less than 5% of women realistically offer anything that even comes close to that sort of arrangement, right? I'm being charitable here and saying that women could potentially still offer something positive, but at the same time, the vast majority of them won't, and in my opinion, it has to come short of marriage, cohabitation, and having children. There's nothing that a woman could offer to offset the risks and liabilities associated with that for the man. But if you are still looking for some form of relationship or dating, no guy that is worthwhile and that isn't thinking with his dick is going to go off with a feminist. No guy that is intelligent and self-aware of where things stand in the dating market today is going to go off with a woman that has a high body count if he figures out that she has the high body count. No man is going to put himself in that position that is a worthwhile guy, really, to have any sort of relationship with, in my opinion. I mean, I guess if you're a woman and you just want to get with the guy that only wants sex and is really thirsty all the time and couldn't possibly make good life decisions in terms of relationships for himself, I guess if that's what a woman wants, she can have that. But in terms of quality men that are thinking for themselves and are aware of what's going on overall in this environment, in this dating market, we do not care. Those men do not care about your career, about your education, about your demands and expectations of men while you offer basically nothing in return for trying to meet those demands. We're not impressed. We're not challenged by it. We just want to avoid those kinds of women at all costs. There's no positive incentive for us to deal with that BS. That's what it boils down to. And so again, smart men realize that all these factors that I mentioned on my list provide no positive incentive for dating or interacting with a woman, and in cases like the high body count or relationship history, actually create liabilities that we have no reason whatsoever to want to deal with. For guys that still want to date, they'll just find a woman that doesn't have a high body count, which is getting more challenging, to be fair, but the alternative is to just not date. There's no reason to take on all this baggage and all this nonsense. It's not a challenge. It's not being intimidated. We just have no reason. There's no incentive to do this. Men do not exist for the sake of doing what women want them to do. Men make good decisions for themselves, especially once they become more rational and mature individuals. And those men are just simply not going to date any of the type of women that I've mentioned here. These men will continue to reject dealing with these kinds of women that I've mentioned for as long as they receive little to no benefit in return for dating in general. And that's what I'm going to wrap this video up with, guys. Is just, it amazes me how clueless, how completely delusional even your average women are out there when it comes to men's responses. Just seeing men as really, from a very solipsistic point of view, nothing other than a receptacle for whatever it is that the woman wants him to be, right? In other words, just nothing but an object that is supposed to do what women want him to do. And that's just not reality. Only men that think with their dicks act that way. Only men that have no ability to process what's going on around them in terms of what actually is taking place between men and women now, only those men that are foolish act that way. The men that women typically want to have a relationship with, they're not going to put up with this crap. They're not going to entertain these kinds of women that I've mentioned. They're just going to either opt out entirely, or they're going to date women that actually have something positive to offer, which are very few and far between in terms of their numbers. And that's pretty much the conclusion, guys, is you're going to see more of this delusional stuff. This is just sort of my attempt to put the last word out on this, because it's crazy how women and society just think that men need to do whatever women want them to do, regardless of the personal incentive involved in taking that action. Oh, you should just date a woman that has a high body count. You should just date a woman that's fat, right? That's another one that I didn't really mention here, but date a woman that's significantly overweight or obese. You should just want to date a woman that's a feminist, even though her ideology is that she doesn't need to have any respect for you because the patriarchy has abused women throughout all of history. I mean, that's literally what you have to believe as a feminist. That's their ideology. That's their framework. Why should you as a man want to deal with that? And the answer is, smart men don't deal with that. We don't care about your income. We don't care about your education. We're not impressed with your body count and your relationship history, if it's extensive and if it's damaging, if it's something that has left an overall negative mark on you. We don't care about your demands and expectations of men. We don't care if you're strong and independent. And we don't care about your negative personality traits and qualities. We just want to avoid those things because we do things based on, we make dating decisions, relationship decisions, other decisions in life based on what is in our incentive to do, what actually provides something positive or a benefit for us. And we're just not going to deal with this. And you can be delusional and think that these guys are just intimidated by your body count, or we just don't have what it takes to impress you because you have a career. We just don't want to put up with your crap, and you're not worth dealing with. And that's really all this boils down to. Men simply don't have a reason to put up with these types of women in their lives at this stage.